I think it was Bob Dylan who sang about the times they are a changin'. And, well, I guess that's always a little bit true. It seems like it's especially appropriate like right now. And I hope it's all good because there's a few things that really do need a change in so that we can resume functionality in our industry and the rest of life, really. And particularly, this is true anywhere that there's bureaucracy. Like, how many times have you said something recently like, don't we have a technology to just automate this? Or maybe since the beginning of the pandemic, maybe you said something similar like, can we just do this remotely? Well, more and more, it's seeming like the answer is yes. And just about every meeting and collaboration now can be done from the comfort of your home over Zoom or Teams or whatever. And for the most part, that's pretty cool. That is, unless your kid pops in on your live broadcast or you accidentally left your favorite sex toy on the shelf right behind you. But anyway, what about in aviation? Well, we don't pilot passengers remotely, at least not yet. And we can, but we don't really do remote tower operations. But you could argue that just about all radar stuff's remote, though, but of course not from home. But there is one thing we just might be able to do remotely now, but the jury's still out on whether or not it's a great idea. I'm talking about your next check ride. Yeah. Don't go away. Welcome. You found Podcasting on a Plane. I'm Brandon Gonzalez, and this is the show where we talk about the backstories in aviation. I'm a tower controller, but also a CFI and a former aircraft salesman, a plane crash survivor, cyclist, father of two, and apparently an aviation podcaster. Who knew? And with that list of former lives, I've taken a check ride or two. And while most of them were straightforward, things have changed a lot since my last one. And now, with the pandemic and so on, we've had to come up with new ways to adapt. And it looks like the bane of every pilot's existence is finally going to get its turn. Before we get started, I want to thank the patrons of this show who make it all possible. They contribute per episode via patreon.com, and that's what keeps the content coming. So thank you all. Now, speaking of backstory and check rides and stuff like that, Rob Mark from jetwine.com, and also a little magazine called Flying, he tipped me off to a development in the FSDO world about the opportunity to conduct a check ride remotely. It seems pretty simple, but it turns out it's really not. So, intros aside, let's just get right to it, because there's a lot to explain, and he does a great job. A lot better than I could. Here's Rob.
The story really isn't about the fact that FAA has a lot of jobs all the time. It's the fact that that has filtered down to the FSDO level so that there aren't enough inspectors to get practical work done. And the FAA just hasn't really done much of anything about that. People have probably heard about DPE shortages and the fact that it takes a long time to get a check ride. And so they may go, yeah, oh, okay. Some of these people may never have heard about the old days where if you asked 10 FSDOs the same question, you might get 10 different answers because that's really what the FSDOs are a bunch of nice folks, I think they're nice, giving you their opinion of what they've read in the regs or how they understand the world. And so it was not cut and dry, as Washington says, this is how you'll handle that. It just doesn't work like that. And so this idea of the shortage of people has now evolved into the fact that the DPEs and pilots that fly for 135s that need check rides there are not enough people to give them their check rides once a year to make sure they're up to snuff. And so everybody's been on extensions. And so this one FSDO said, well, why don't we do this stuff with video? And it sounded like a good idea. Maybe it is. I don't know. You could do a Zoom camera run in the room where the DPE's doing the oral, and then that could get shared with the FSDO to say, yeah, okay, John's on the right track here, or gee, this needs help, or what have you. They can use a cell phone video to video an aircraft walk around a pre-flight. But then in the airplane to go run the check ride, you need cameras and audio in the cockpit, and they GoPros or something like that. And people said, well, that's cool, but who's going to pay for that? Well, the DPEs are going to pay for that. And So does that mean if they've got to fund all this equipment, so is the price going to go up even more? Well, so this guy Bob Rockmaker over at the Flight School Association of North America, which is the trade group for flight schools, wrote this story raising a number of issues, and he's known for going, yeah, it's a great idea, but what about this? So he's kind of outspoken, and he's talking about how does this alter the pilot bill of rights? Would these videos be FOIA accessible? Do the applicants have a right to the for a to get a copy? What about the liability of somebody posting one of these suckers about Brandon's last check ride on the internet, and what other people might say about it or how they might use it? And so again, all of this stuff has come from a couple of local FISDOs, but there's been nothing out of the feds in Washington from flight standards to say, okay, here's how we're going to do this. And so it's just kind of languishing. And could this fill the gap? Maybe, but what would make it a problem? And I think the idea is to just tell this story in terms that anybody that's had a check ride would understand, just to raise some thoughts in their mind about what they might be looking at or should be asking questions about later on when they take a check ride, and knowing that right now there's nothing set in stone, and this is just kind of working its way through the system, however it works its way through the system. And that's really where we are at this point with this whole thing. So does that seem to make sense to you?
All right. So wow, that was a lot of stuff that you just said. So there are so many things to unpack in what you just said. I'm not actually sure where to start, but let's just sort of give a quick recap. Basically, not enough bodies to go around at the FISDOs for reasons which we will discuss. There are technologies now to do remote check rides, which is cool, but maybe also not cool, just like pretty much all technology as we've discovered at this point. And then also, it's kind of, this hasn't been done before. So like a lot of the things that we're doing right now, the regulatory environment for all this still has a lot of question marks, and yet it's still kind of just going to happen. So we're going to unpack each one of those things, I think, bit by bit. But one of the best resources that I've seen that has been doing that already for us is FSANA or FSANA, the Flight School Association of, I think it's North America. I think that's right. And they've been doing a lot of work about, hey, how's this actually going to work out privacy wise and so on. So it's been a pretty good resource, and I'll put a link up to a little document we've got from them. But is that a good recap, Rob, what I just said?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fine, and it's one of those things that we don't necessarily need to be afraid of this, but it does in this environment raise an awful lot of questions, and they're questions that are worthy of answers, but also they're worthy of concern by someone taking a check ride down the road, because again, we want to make sure that this is done correctly, or should I say safely, because when you talk about recording videos, you just don't know where those things are going to end up.
Yeah, and everybody, I think at this point that's grown up in the digital age, or actually maybe even worse if you grew up before the digital age, you're going to have a healthy amount of skepticism about, hey, if you're going to record me doing something, where's that going to go, and who's going to be able to see it, and for how long? And the answer to all those questions is usually something you're probably not going to like. So maybe we should just tackle, other than the overarching point of, the FISDO doing remote video check rides, why aren't there enough inspectors to go around to just kind of keep doing it like we've always been doing it with DPEs and inspectors and so on?
Well, I think this is only personal opinion, because I have not, of course, as you know, I worked for FAA, but that was decades ago. So I don't necessarily know that my insight on this is correct, but the FAA can be a somewhat difficult place to work. I think the last time I saw the list of the top federal agencies to work for, I believe FAA was right down there at the bottom of that list. I think that's part of what has caused the shortage. Because honestly, as a safety inspector, or as they like to call them now, managing specialists, they get paid pretty well. I mean, you can be starting in the low six figures, plus retirement benefits and all that, and it's considered a pretty nice gig. But however, over the years, because of COVID, the inspectors don't really go outside of the building. Actually, they don't even come into the building because everybody's working from home. So when it comes to check rides, which, as we all know, a check ride is with an inspector. If you have one, they're right there across the table with you, and they're right inside the airplane with you. And the inspectors are just as concerned about COVID as everybody else. So that's been a real problem because the designated pilot examiners that we all know for check rides also need an annual inspection of their own, sort of a recurrent inspection. And there's nobody to give those because the inspectors aren't in the office. So it's a bit of a really messy situation. So a lot of pilots are operating on extensions. Not, some people might know about the extensions for the medical issues that we saw early, maybe mid 2020. But now, of course, it's certainly found its way down the road to people that need check rides, charter pilots, again, DPEs. So if you guys can't get together, how do you do those? And that's the issue that that Bob Rockmaker over at the Flight School Association kind of raised, because the guidance on how we're going to do these rides didn't come from Washington. It kind of bubbled up from the ground from a number of FSDOs that said, "Hey, we have all this technology. Why can't we use Zoom and cell phone cameras or GoPros or whatever, and we can make this work?" And it sounds like a cool idea. I mean, who wouldn't, in this day and age, except for old people like me, say, "Hey, that should work." But what the Flight School Association came up with was, "Hey, this could be cool, but here's a few things you guys might want to be thinking about, since this is not gospel coming from flight standards in Washington. It's coming from some nice people at some FSDOs around the country who think, well, here, this could work." And so again, when you have one of these sort of homegrown systems, they're not thinking about all the fallout. They're only thinking about the positives. So I thought maybe I could just bring this issue to everybody's attention, because we all know what it's like to take a check ride. And these are just really points that people need to be aware of, because it involves their rights, as in the Pilot Bill of Rights, there are liability possibilities, so that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, first off, when I first read this, I thought, well, hey, we can just do all check rides remotely, right? Like, why can't DPEs do it? Could you just pretty much record your final check ride at your 141 school with your CFI, and if it's passable, then, why can't that be signed off, right? But that's not really what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about when you're flying professionally and you've got the quote-unquote fed in the jump seat kind of thing, or when you're the DPE and you need your annual check ride. And I know a couple of people that have gone on the sort of double check ride from hell, where you're on a check ride, but your examiner's also on a check ride. So, don't sneeze wrong, because we can all see how that's going to go. But in a case like this, we could do a lot of different things with the technology. And one that I kind of thought of was, when you have a DPE given a check ride, the reason we usually do that is because, number one, maybe a lot of people are afraid of going with the FAA, but number two, they're just available. I mean, there's always so many inspectors to go around, and obviously, as we've touched on, that's an issue. But there's also a significant cost associated with having a DPE. I mean, it could be $1,000 to take a check ride at this point, cash. At least that's what it is where I live. And the FAA check ride's free, let's be honest. So maybe this could be an open door to the FAA actually being able to do more check rides at a saved cost to the applicant as opposed to more. But at the same time, we're dealing with equipment now and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure if that would be realistic. But what is realistic is that you're getting recorded. And I think we all want to know what's going to happen to those recordings, where they're going to go, and how long they're going to be kept around, and if your buddies are going to be able to laugh at you for how you pinked your last check ride.
I think that's very well said, and it's the part that the FSDO guys who give the check rides are probably not thinking a whole lot about. I mean, I took my first type rating ride in a swept wing airplane. Was an old Citation 650, which nobody even knows anymore anything about, but it was a big deal to me because, again, it was my first swept wing airplane, and I was nervous anyway. And I walk into the at flight safety to sit down for the oral, and the examiner says, "Hey, Rob, this is Tom. He's going to be sitting in with us today." And I went, "Okay." He works for he's with the FSDO, the local FSDO, and he's got to watch me give you your check ride. As in, wink, wink, nod, nod. You better not screw this up, kid, because I can't save your butt. And I went, okay. Like, I wasn't nervous enough before. Now I think I'm more nervous, but I got through it all right. But again, this whole aspect of somebody watching over your shoulder, it's part and parcel to flying. If you don't like that, then you need to go find some other way to to use your time, especially if you're going to be a professional. Check rides are they just are. I mean, you're never going to get rid of them. But again, we're just looking at, is this a better way or is this not? And again, remember, this is not coming from flight standards in Washington. It's kind of bubbled up from the surface. And so I think one of the things that people have been asking, and this was in the Flight School Association's point about this. There's a pilot bill of rights right now that we fought very hard for a few years ago that says the applicant has the right to know this and has the right to see this documentation or to understand how some things that perhaps were used against them will be destroyed, so that the person knows that the job was taken care of, and that they didn't just have someone say, "Oh yeah, don't worry, I'll take care of that," and then something appears out of nowhere a few years later. But I think too, the lawyers have started looking at this, saying, "Well, gee, if there's a video of Sheila taking her commercial check ride, and she later doesn't work out very well at her second job, and they say, well, she did fail her first check ride. Well, let's go back and look at the video. Let's see what kind of a pilot she was. Did she just barely fail, or was this a holy smokes? There have been 5 errors here, and which one do we fail this person on? So will this stuff be FOIA-able? Will it be accessible through a Freedom of Information Act that, like I said, maybe this person's working for a carrier and they screw up and they have an accident and they go, how did this person even get their check ride? How did they even pass it? Look at this video evidence. And it's like anything else you say and do, you go, well, wait a minute. If it's out of context, you don't know everything. You only know what you see and hear. And so people are a little concerned about that kind of thing.
That kind of brings up the Colgan air crash, because it came out eventually that the captain of that flight had a really rough road getting there. And people were kind of surprised he made it at all. And so to the point that you just made, would that be something we could have, it was discoverable anyway, but could we go back and truly see just how the sausage was made and how bad it really was back then? That's a big question, and we don't know.
Well, no, that's a good point, and of course, people are, the Flight School Association is saying, well, you could have if someone had kept it. I mean, assuming all this technology was available back then, but then also taken out of context, would it have looked worse for this pilot or better? Because it could be the quality of the cameras that were used, the recording of the audio. Uh, who knows? And let's be honest, what they're thinking about is that if you are taking the oral portion of a check ride, you can turn on a Zoom camera and leave it on the laptop and just have somebody sitting in the background there on the internet watching your oral and go, yeah, okay, that examiner did a good job at the oral. Uh, or the walk around on the airplane during pre-flight. I could certainly walk around with you as you're doing the pre-flight. You could explain to me what you're doing or why you're doing it, and capture it with my cell phone video. That's pretty easy. But again, when you get into the airplane, you have other issues. There are only certain kinds of cameras that are really able to work well, and God knows all of us have watched some of these videos of people who thought they needed to record every flight they ever made from the time they began training, and we watch people make some pretty awful mistakes along the way, and they're posting it anyway because they think it's cool. Okay, I don't think I'd necessarily go with that, but then again, the cost of this equipment, the say to having two GoPros in the cockpit, one that shows the perhaps the instrument panel from inside, and maybe another one focused on the applicant in the pilot seat. Who's paying for that? Because GoPros are, last time I checked, I think they're probably $300 or $400 a piece, and they need two of them plus a device to record the audio. So who's paying for all that? Well, none of this information from the FSDO guys that kind of put this together even addresses that. And so would that mean that the price of check rides, which, as you mentioned earlier, is already pretty steep? I mean, does that mean that'll go up even more? That's a good one. Nobody has really figured that out yet.
Yeah, and nobody has ever in the history of GoPros had difficulty setting one up or getting the shot they wanted, ever.
That's right. Like, how do you make this thing start? I thought I started it. Oh man, I missed the whole flight because I thought it was running and it wasn't running. Yeah, okay. I've never done that. But as one of the DPEs I spoke to last week said, the one disadvantage is that a lot of the people that are DPEs are not necessarily full-fledged members of the YouTube generation. And so, they may have set it up right. They may have not set it up right. If they give a check ride, but the video fails, do they have to do the check ride over again? It's like the Q&A, I'm sorry, not the Q&A, the FAQs, they're not out there yet. And but also I think there's again, touching on what we did just a little while ago about the legal aspect of this, how and or if this would be discoverable in a court of law if something really went badly. Nobody knows. In fact, nobody has really decided what happens to the video after Frank Jones, the DPE, records this equipment watching you take an instrument proficiency check. Do they own the video? Does the applicant own it? Or do they get a copy? Or if it's going to be destroyed, how does the applicant and the DPE know that it's been destroyed? Because it's not just you taking the check ride, it's the DPE getting their check ride. And what if the video shows the DPE doing something they're not supposed to be doing? Maybe giving somebody a second chance on something that they really shouldn't be doing. Then what happens to the DPE? And they go, I don't think I like that. So there are those kinds of questions. Uh, what about the safety concerns of people that some people have done this, sort of perform for the camera and say and do things they might not ordinarily do if they weren't being recorded. And because we all know that sometimes it's pretty easy to forget that GoPro is stuck to the inside of the cabin above somebody's head. You just don't even notice it. And will any of these videos ever show up on YouTube? Or Facebook? When somebody said, no, I thought we destroyed that. Well, actually, it made a copy, and we thought we took care of that. And somebody, as you said, watches you have a really bad day on a check ride. Nobody wants that. So there's a lot of stuff here that needs answering, and that has not really happened yet. Again, some designated pilot examiners that I know said, we don't care, bring it on, we can handle it. And others have said, I'm old enough and smart enough to say that, when you start recording things, that content has a way of ending up in places you didn't expect. And who's to say that if a copy of this got out somewhere that somebody didn't edit it and say, oh my gosh, look at that. And then somebody, edits in a shot of something right ahead. How come you didn't notice that? Well, because it didn't really happen. So, remember the fake news from a few years back? That could be that. I mean, there's just so many ways for people to manipulate recordings. And again, this has not been set in stone. And so these are the kinds of things I think that pilots taking any kind of check ride, whether they're DPEs or just you're just taking your commercial ride or whatever, you need to be thinking about. But of course, I think there are a few good portions of this. One that I hadn't even thought of until I started talking to people is that if people use Cloud Ahoy, which is a great debriefing tool, you have the entire audio and the recording of your flight on Cloud Ahoy that you could piece back into a complete flight. And yeah, I can see where you could make a pretty good story out of that. But again, this is all, to me at least, a lot of this is open to editing. And that always concerns me when I see what we can do with technology in the sense of being able to make people say and do things or look like they're saying or doing these things when that actually never happened. And I think that's something we really have to be concerned about.
The ability to, I think, do what they call a deep fake is really what we're concerned about here. And that's just, there are software companies out there. I think Adobe's one of them. And I'm a proud user. I'm editing this podcast on Audition, but at the same time, the idea that you could have this software that will learn somebody's voice to the point that you can type something out and then have that said in that person's voice is pretty scary. I mean, it's cool. It's fascinating. It's also really, really, really scary if that were to be in the wrong hands, because you could very easily put together a video. Remember they did it in Forrest Gump when he keeps going and seeing the president and says he got shot in the buttocks, and then he, the president responds. Well, obviously that didn't happen, and then now we can kind of look back and it looks a little fake, but at the time that was amazing. But now you can do that on a laptop pretty easily, and they're coming up with ways to automate that type of stuff. So,
well, and imagine to your point about, let's say, a video of a check ride, and the applicant says, well, I failed the check ride, and it wasn't fair because when I asked the DPE this question, he said that. And the DPE goes back and looks at that video and says, oh, man, I did say that, but let's make it say I didn't give him that advice at all. and they play the video back and they go, nope, that's really not going to be a passable maneuver, I'm afraid. And the applicant goes, but that's not what he said in the airplane. So you can just kind of see how things could get out of hand. And again, right now we don't know, and so I think there are a lot of questions there. But finally, I would tell you that if you kind of like working for the government, and you want a really great paycheck. D- Flight standards inspectors, they're still looking for them. Quite a few if you want to join up.
Yeah, could be a good gig. Can we coin a new term right now?
A new gig?
No, a new term.
Oh, go ahead.
Hashtag fake check ride.
I think that's a very interesting possibility, and because again, the people that have these ideas usually have great intentions. They really do. But there are bad people out there that figure out ways to use these technologies against people they don't like. And I just don't think anybody wants to see that happen. And I don't know if we can just, trust human nature to do the right thing, because that does not always happen.
Yeah, well, and again, before we sound like a bunch of Debbie Downer conspiracy theorists, I mean, I think you and I can agree that 99.9% of all people and all check rides that do this would be like, oh, you know what? Thank goodness we can utilize technology to get this check ride done or to keep the industry running or whatever. But it just takes that one time, and then stuff gets kind of ruined for everyone.
Well, and I know what I would do if I was taking a check ride and they found out it was video. I would want to be able to watch the card come out, the SD card come out of the cameras and go right into my laptop, so that I could keep a copy of the original, and then say, how are we going to get a copy to the FISDO people or whatever, and how is it going to be destroyed? But I'd keep it so that well, guys, I don't know what that is over there, but that's not what really happened. This is an original copy of the video, only because I'm a little paranoid about that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, all right, let's look at this little document we got here from a FISDO, which shall remain nameless, but it's more or less just a quick checklist on how one might conduct a remote or recorded view flight check. I guess that's what they're calling it. Remote or recorded view flight check. That's kind of the terminology being used here. And what this checklist does is, presumably, if you're the inspector who's going to be giving this check ride, or even the DPE or somebody who's going to be acting as a safety pilot or crew, and then somebody's watching this remotely, how is that going to go? And I'm going to put this up for anybody who wants to kind of read it. I'm obviously not going to ruin everyone's afternoon by reading this word for word, but sort of the gist of it is where it starts. It says, as technology increases in its reliability and quality, it allows the FAA to leverage those technologies to accomplish various tasks. And this document covers performing a flight check via the use of video communication technologies and video recording devices. So in the next paragraph, it talks into ground events such as oral examinations, pre-flights, and so on, can easily be accomplished via use of Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something like that, because obviously we have Wi-Fi or cell service, and you can pretty much just set the laptop, as you said, on the desk during the oral, and that's it. Or you can bring your phone out and just hold it and talk about what you're doing, just like a live stream. No issues there. But then we get into the flying portion, we're going to have some issues, because you're probably going to run out of cell signal. They're taking an immense amount of bandwidth to actually live stream an entire flight. So you're going to be talking about a situation where it's all going to have to be recorded for later use. So as we go down here, they give a little bit of a checklist of what equipment you would need. And there's actually a nice little list. And what it says is the means of completing the FAA surveillance evaluation is on a voluntary basis, and the stakeholder must be in agreement that they're responsible for all aspects of attaining acceptable equipment, installation, and use, which is kind of interesting. And that does answer one of our questions about whose equipment are we using. And that's, I guess, the stakeholders, in this case, going to be the person taking the check ride. Because again, it could be just a pilot for a company. It could be a commercial check ride for your own certificate. I don't know. But it's going to need a computer, a laptop, or desktop with internet voice camera capabilities that you can operate something like Zoom. The ability to receive real-time streaming during the walk around and pre-startup sequences in the aircraft, such as Zoom or Teams, and it could be a mobile phone or an iPad or something with software that can stream. A minimum of 2 high-res cameras with the capability to record both video and audio. The example they give is a GoPro Hero 5 or newer, but if you have an older one, like I have a Hero 4 Black, but there's a little adapter you'd have to get for the audio. And it says that it may be possible to capture all needed information with one camera if the aircraft primarily has analog gauges, not a glass panel, and is small, such as a Cessna or something. But 2 cameras would be preferred. Camera 1 would be set to angle forward-facing and view both pilots or the PIC in a single pilot aircraft, and view the cockpit forward-facing windows as much as feasible. And then camera 2 would be the primary flight instruments of the flying pilot, and then the audio. One camera, either one would have to be connected to the audio, and therein lies the trouble for a lot of people. And then after that, it says all recordings, video and audio, are the sole property of the operator. So I guess that would be your company or maybe flight school. I don't know. Maybe you'd be considered the operator if you're at a flight school, because they're not really an operator. It's just you taking a check ride. But the authority and responsibility to delete digital files lies solely with the operator. And then ideally, FAA personnel would review recordings in a view-only format, such as YouTube or Vimeo, and will avoid downloading any such recordings to the maximum extent possible. There's a little ambiguity. But if circumstances require downloading the recordings for review, they would be deleted by the safety inspector as soon as possible after the video review is complete and the debrief has been performed. And then, though the data remains the sole property of the operator, it's highly suggested that the stakeholder be advised to also delete recordings to preserve personal information. Okay. The document then goes on to do a little bit more about how the pre-test evaluation would be conducted, and then the event sequence, and then the fact that you'd have to be basically given the amount of time after your check ride so that the person could go review the check ride and then give you your results no later than a day. And then at the very end, it talks about, items of importance, and these are basically the what ifs. And they start by talking about use of this process is intended as a quote-unquote last option when no other in-person options are available or feasible. And it has to be made clear to the operator that should a failure of the video or audio recordings occur, complete failure, gaps in continuity, or any alteration, that the check ride may be invalidated at the discretion of the safety inspector. And the check ride would then, of course, have to be reaccomplished. And, many of us have had a letter of discontinuance at a check ride for one reason or another. And we don't have to go through all those, but it would probably be similar to that. But it's a huge bummer, because then guess what? You get to go pay again and do the whole thing over and not finish today. But then it talks more again about all the whose property this stuff is, and it keeps saying the operator. So I'm guessing if you fly for somebody or some company, it's going to be with them. But again, do you really want your boss having videos of you flying for the rest of time? Who knows? And then it gets into some things about in-flight battery changes and things like that if you're going to run out of battery in your GoPro.
Well, sure, and think about that it doesn't say that the operator, as in your boss, will maintain the video after the ride and will destroy it after 30 days or what. Who's to say that your boss may not say, you kind of don't seem to fit in here really well, and the fact that you're not flying very well and you busted that check ride, and not just the fact that you did, but why you busted it. And again, maybe this isn't the place for you. And you're going, what? But so this just opens up an awful lot of doors to topics that people have never really given much thought to during a check ride. We know that the record, because the NTSB years ago asked the FAA to revise the pilot record database after the Colgan event. And that was, 10, 12 years ago, and it never got done for whatever reason. I'm sure FAA could give you great reasons why it didn't, but the point is that all of the holes that were there when that Colgan pilot fell through pretty much are still there. And so this is a good thing to protect pilots, or is this a bad thing? Nobody's completely sure. And so you just want to make sure when you have a check ride and you find out it's being recorded, you give some thought to that and just say, oh, I'm sure the examiner will handle it for me and it'll all be fine. Yeah, but what if it's not?
Yeah. Well, make sure you fly real well that day.
Yeah, it's not. That's really the truth. Assuming you're still flying, which has slowed a few folks down this year, and certainly here in the Midwest, we got dumped on in Chicago week before last with almost 20 inches of snow in one storm, and it's just now starting to melt. So maybe I'll get to go fly. Hopefully, I still remember what to do. How does that go? You pull back to go up, and then you do something to go down. How does that work again?
Well, you can pull up to go up, push forward to go down, or you can pull up to go up and then keep pulling up, and then you get to go down either way.
Right. See, it's a good thing I know you, because
Yeah.
those little details just kind of sneak past me at times. But
I think the houses get bigger is how that one's supposed to go. But what you could do is go back and listen to the very last episode with aviationquotations.com and get it word for word if you like.
absolutely, and then you'll hear it right from well, I shouldn't say the horse's mouth because you didn't use a horse.
His name's Dave,
Okay.
but he didn't make the quote.
No.
But,
no,
well,
of
at any
course
rate, let's do this. So I think that, as the living in the information age continues to be the sort of biggest double-edged sword ever, possibly more than even the most pessimistic of us could have imagined, I may regret this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Let's put it out to everybody. I want to invite you to tell me what you think about this. You think it's a great thing, think it's a bad thing, have some insight or something that we missed. I want to invite you to either email me or use the SpeakPipe widget on the website, or after this, I'll give you Rob's phone number if you want to talk to him about it directly. I'm kidding, but I would like to hear what y'all have to say, and let me know if you do or don't want it perhaps read on the show. But I'd like to know, as this kind of pans out, what you all are thinking. Have you taken a remote check ride via video? If you've done it, I'd really love to actually possibly even have you on the show to talk about how it went. But I want to hear what you all think, so I'm going to invite you all to send that in.
And we could tell them that even though you won't give them my phone number, they can always find me at jetwine.com, and they can, because I get readers that that have listened to your show that find me and say, "Hey, I heard you on with what's his name over there, and you know where, talking about this, that, or other, and why didn't you talk about this, or why did you say that?" And of course, I'm very honest, of course, and I just tell them that it's your fault.
It always is.
Yes, and that's like being a parent too. I didn't do that, Dad.
No, that's how I got used to it. It's fine. I
That's
accept.
right.
But if you do have any complaints, you can send them to Max Trescott at Max. No, I'm kidding.
I forgot we could blame it on Max.
That's right.
Oh my goodness. Well, this has been an interesting topic, and I would of course love to hear what some of your listeners have to say about this. Maybe a lot of them say, who cares? No big deal. Okay, I'm just curious to hear their point of view on this, or maybe we've opened a few eyes, and that's what we do here. That's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I should probably close out by saying that no matter what anyone's opinion is, I, as an employee of the FAA, those are their opinions and solely that of themselves and Rob Mark at jetwine.com. And I just want to hear what y'all have to say. And so does Rob.
You bet. And thanks for listening.
Well, I'm 100% sure you've got an opinion on what you heard today. And again, I'm inviting you to weigh in, and I can't wait to hear from you. If you didn't already know, the place, of course, to send your thoughts is Brandon at podcastingonaplane.com. You can also use your smartphone or SpeakPipe widget that pops up when you visit the podcastingonaplane.com website to record something and send that in. And particularly in this case, it'll probably end up on the show. While you're on the website, maybe consider supporting the show financially if you have the means. And if you find value in it, I'd really appreciate having you on board as a patron. You get your episodes early and sometimes other fun stuff too. Our newest patrons, Rudy, can too. Welcome, Rudy. And if you want to be like Rudy, head over to podcastingonaplane.com and click on Support the Show. If you're not in the recurring thing, though, there's a PayPal link too for whatever you feels right. If you want to stay sharp on the mic, make sure to use the affiliate code DELTA at plainenglishsim.com to get 10% off the best smartphone-based ATC radio comm simulator around. There's a link in the show notes for that too. And as always, I thank you so much for your support in whatever form it takes, and for listening to the show and passing the word along about this or any of your favorite aviation podcasts to a friend. Oh, and speaking of friends, make sure to go to jetwine.com. That's Rob's website. Well, that's all for now. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day.
The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. Brandon's comments and those of his guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc., are not part of his official responsibility as a controller or as an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are his, and those of his guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. Also, while he's a CFI, he's not acting as your CFI, nor is he your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice or legal counsel. If you're in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.